Welcome to ACE. This is a show that explores the self-employed creative life and how you can do your best work. I'm your host, Darren Joe, and thank you so much for being here. Back when I was 22, I was a statistics lecturer at Nghi An Polytechnic in Singapore. It was my first job after college, and I had some free time and I was looking for some creative projects to pursue. Because back in college, aside from studying, I basically spent all my time playing tennis. So I finally had some free time to pursue some things that I never got a chance to in college, and one of them was to act. So I stumbled across this flyer that was looking for actors to be in student films. And I'm so glad I just decided to go to the audition and try out, and luckily I was chosen to be in this film called Cell 118. It was about a prisoner in Changi prison in Singapore during Japan's occupation of Singapore during World War II. And of course, I played a mean Japanese soldier. Well, he wasn't mean, but he didn't say a word. So it just shows you how good of an actor I was. But I'm so glad I was in that film because I got to meet this promising group of Singapore film students. And one of them, the art director of that film and the guest of this episode, Boo Junfeng, is now one of Singapore's most well-known film directors. His first feature film, made in 2010, called Sandcastle, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival International Critics Week, and it was the first Singapore film to do so. And this event has a long history and also launched the careers of famous directors like Wong Kar-wai and Alejandro González Iñárritu, who directed The Birdman and The Revenant, for example. And his second feature film came out in 2016 called Apprentice, was Singapore's 2017 official entry at the Academy Awards in the foreign language film category. So he's made two feature films of note, and yeah, I was in his student film, booyah. So a lot of our conversation centers around making art that is true to you while making a living. And I hope that Junfeng's story inspires those of you in a similar situation. It has certainly inspired me. So here's my conversation with Boo Junfeng. My next guest has written and directed two feature films, which were both screened at the Cannes Film Festival, as well as several award-winning short films that have been screened around the world. He's received a Rising Director Award at the Busan International Film Festival. Boo Junfeng, welcome to the show.
Hi, Darren. Happy to be here.
Well, let's just get this out of the way first, that I acted in one of your student films all the way back in your Polytechnic days. I don't know if you can remember.
Yeah, of course I do.
Yeah.
Those interesting times.
It was so amazing to even see back then your dedication to your craft. I remember being on the set and seeing, because you were art director for that short film, which was actually screened in Hollywood, by the way, in Warner Brothers. But I still remember all the detailed drawings you had laying out each scene and what you wanted it to look like. And I just remember being so amazed by how detailed and thoughtful you were, even back then. And that's when, you were just getting started. So it's really fun now to reconnect all these years later after you've been able to put so much art out there in the world. So I'm so excited for this talk. One of my first questions I had was, you've wanted to become a filmmaker since your teenage years, correct?
Yeah, well, I wanted to be a filmmaker since I was 15, so...
I think that is so special to know that at such a young age, but it's another thing to pursue that, right? Especially in a place like Singapore. I'm wondering, have you ever felt any obstacles to that calling along the way?
When I was starting out, when I was, when I was 15 and I wanted to be a filmmaker, I told my parents I wanted to be a filmmaker. And naturally, it wasn't something that they knew how to deal with, because at that point in time, there was hardly a film industry to speak of in Singapore. And it was a huge unknown. And of course, it just felt like it was a huge leap from me still being in secondary school at that time and having ambitions like that. But I think over time, I got into Nghi An Polytechnic.
Yes.
At that point in time, it was the only film school in Singapore. And I started to actually do well in school. I didn't used to do well when I was in secondary school. And I suppose with that, it kind of gave my parents the assurance that this was, I suppose, a calling of sorts, and something at least I was motivated to do. Of course, so in terms of obstacles in society, naturally, at that time, the idea of making short films, which was, of course, a rite of passage for any young filmmaker, the idea of making short films was you had to explain over and over again what a short film was, where it was going to be shown, what the purpose of it was. Because, I mean, this was like pre-social media and pre-YouTube, right? So the idea of making, films that were 10, 15 minutes long was just kind of incomprehensible, I think, for many people.
Yeah.
So those were I suppose you could say, obstacles, because people didn't quite understand what it was about. But at the same time, because not many people were doing it, it also presented opportunities for me to do what I wanted to do, and then be discovered a lot more easily than it is today. I think, it being an unknown and a kind of a blank canvas was frightening, but at the same time, it was frightening in some ways because it was unknown, but at the same time, it presented me with many opportunities as well.
Yeah, and because you spelled that out so clearly that there wasn't a huge market for what you were doing, and not many people were aware of what you wanted to do in Singapore. And so, did you ever, even after you had made a couple films, did you ever say, "Oh man, like maybe I should do something else"?
Well, this idea of something else can mean so many things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I also there was an insistence that I basically wanted to make films that I felt should be made, and not necessarily films that conformed to what the market wanted.
Yes.
And so it then presented me with several layers of challenges. I mean, first of all, in wanting to pursue film in the first place, which, on its own is a challenge, but at the same time, wanting to make films that weren't immediately the obvious kinds of films that people wanted to see. And then, of course, so in questioning whether or not I wanted to do something else, it could have been in doing something completely different, or in simply doing something that may have been easier for public consumption.
Yes.
I mean, for me, my inspiration for making films in the first place was not the mainstream kinds of films. I appreciated mainstream films, but the ones that truly moved me, that inspired me, were what were considered "quote unquote" art house films. So in even trying to advocate for a space to make films like that was on its own a challenge, because cinema is something that quite often goes back and forth between art and commerce. And when people think of movies, they think of Hollywood, they think of the blockbusters, they think of going into a movie theater on a weekend with popcorn and a drink and enjoying themselves. But for me, it was so much more than that. And to carve out a space for films like that, and to carve out space for me to make films like that, was what I felt I was insisting upon. And so, and because with little bits of success here and there, with the baby steps that I had made with my short films at festivals, and then eventually my first feature film at good festivals, and then my second film, I think I was able to, little by little, I was able to kind of find that space, which was very important for me.
I really admire that so much about you, that you've stuck with that kind of vision of the work you wanted to do, and you not only contributed to that space, but helped, build that space.
Well, I wasn't on my own,
For sure.
of course.
For sure. Yeah.
So what's very nice also in Singapore is that there is actually a group of us, of my friends and my peers who are also doing the same. And we happen to have come from, similar film education backgrounds. So we understand why this is important. And bit by bit, with everyone's contributions and everyone's successes, we are able to articulate better to the public and also to the funders, to the government, why this is important. And so I see it as an effort by the community as well.
Yeah. Talking about just surviving, Singapore, when I lived there, when I was in your film, it was still pretty affordable place to live, but now it's one of the most expensive cities in the world. And you're trying to make your films. How are you able to just survive financially?
So naturally, I would have to take on commission work. And by that, I mean different kinds of projects, including TV commercials. So those tend to pay quite well. But yes, Singapore is an expensive place to live in. So it is often about trying to find that balance between commercials that I want to do or projects that I want to do, or rather projects that I don't mind doing. And then the films that I really, really want to do.
Yeah.
And I've been very fortunate in that, in some ways, because of the attention that I had gotten with the feature films,
yes,
it then gave me a bit more of a bargaining chip to say the kinds of projects that I don't mind taking on. So in a way, with that reputation that's built, it helps to give me a source of income that isn't unbearable. So yeah, it's been working out quite okay for me. I try and diversify what I do as well, in terms of both in my art and also in the stuff that I do for a living, because for me, I don't like repetition. So I try and explore new things. Things like the National Day Parade that I got to be the creative director of just last year, and in previous years I had served as the films and multimedia director as well. So this is like the big national celebration, and it pays well, but at the same time it also gives me the kind of, I'd say, some degree of cachet in the public eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that has also then fed back into my own craft as a filmmaker, or my own projects as a filmmaker. And then also I dabble in installation work in the museums, and I enjoy traveling with them as well. So things like that kind of keep me inspired, that pay the bills, and that also keep me excited. I don't just keep doing the same type of projects over and over again.
Yeah, and for many of our listeners who aren't from Singapore, directing the National Day Parade is a big deal. It's like this huge celebration. So many people tune in to watch that every year. It's once a year. So it's really amazing and impressive you were able to do that. But do you feel that pursuing your craft as a filmmaker and making a living, do you think these two things have to be mutually exclusive? It sounds like you're edging towards the middle in both.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
But I suppose because of how much I'd want to stay true to the kinds of films that I want to make, and because there isn't yet a natural market for the films that I want to make, then this is the path that makes the most sense for me.
Yes.
And of course, the real cost of it is time, because it takes a lot more time to make the films, because I need to make a living in the meantime. It also takes a lot more time because of how the films, the financing structure of the films are designed. The films then require a lot of public funds. basically funds that we don't need to make back. It's funds that are dispersed based on cultural merit and artistic merit. So with those kinds of funds, then it requires us to go to project markets around the world, well, to meet suitable producers from around the world, mostly in Europe and elsewhere in Asia, and then applying for the grants that we qualify for. And bit by bit, we kind of piece it together so that the few investors that come on board for the films, for them it lowers their risk, because they know that, okay, out of say a $1.5 to $2 million budget, really the real money that needs to be recouped is probably just a fraction of it. So that gives the investors confidence. But yeah, as I said, the cost of that really is time, because with a financing structure like that, plus the amount of time that it takes to write the scripts and develop the project, it could take years. So yeah, my last film took me about 3 years before we shot it, and this one is coming to 2 years now.
So let's talk about your last film, Apprentice, which I saw twice over the past 2 days. I mean, this interview gave me a great reason to, see some of your past work. And gosh, there are some points of that film that, the hair on my neck is just sticking up.
Have you been here before?
No, sir.
We're a maximum security prison. You'll be handling rehab prisoners. But here we also have punishment cells, and death row cells.
I think equally as impressive as like the cinematography and the story and the way you chose to examine the issue of execution in Singapore was what do they call it? The title sequence and the end credits? Is that the title sequence when you show like all the producers and stuff like that at the beginning? Because there were so many, like you said. I mean, it was like maybe 6, if I remember. And then, obviously the end credits seeing everyone involved in that film. And so my question to you is, I know you've said in other interviews that you've learned how to pitch right investors, find the right partners to come on board. How do you build this vision for your work that can attract investors, that can attract, obviously all your actors and people making the film, so many people involved?
How do I do it? Well, it takes a lot of time, right? And therefore it takes a lot of patience and tenacity to build a project. And it takes the right collaborators to believe in the vision as well, and to work with you on it. And over time also it takes a lot of trust to hand over some of these decisions to people whom care about what you do, who are there to push you further, to challenge you sometimes. And so I think it's kind of an amalgamation of all of these ingredients. Well, for me, when I have a story I want to tell, I try and tell it and I push it, and then sometimes I don't do so well, and then my producers help to step in, and they try and shape it at least verbally for me, or put it on paper for me, and then we kind of move the project ahead, and try to be as open to different kinds of collaboration as possible. And from one project to the next, it helps that with my short films, I went to many festivals, and then with my first feature film, I went to Cannes Critics Week, which is an amazing platform to be able to debut a film. And then that built a certain reputation. And then from there, you move on to the next film. So that is where I try to, at least from a career standpoint, try to shape it to what I felt was able to allow me to continue to do what I do. But then there's the other part of it, which is the audience, which is in growing the audience for my films and also the films that I care for, so that in time to come, we can no longer say that there isn't a market for films like that. So everything kind of just feeds into one another.
Yes.
But it's a very kind of a complex web of things that I care about, and that, as you said, the various intersections of why this matters, how it matters, it kind of just feeds into one another. Yeah.
Yeah, and each film has built on the next for you, right? And given you more momentum. And I mean, does that funding from different film commissions and governments and so forth, does that come with strings attached?
We try and look for the ones with no strings attached.
Right? Because I imagine that's another challenge that would come up.
Yeah, I mean, naturally there will be some strings attached here and there. For most of it, it's not so much about having strings attached to the content, but strings attached to whom you work with, right? So if, say, we get financing in France, then there will be some spending requirement in France, and therefore I would then need to work with crew members or talents from France. Not that I would complain about that, because I mean they have some of the best technicians and artists in the world.
Yes.
So yeah, so then it's always about deconflicting what kind of funds make the most sense for us. While Singapore is expensive, it's not as expensive as Europe in terms of filmmaking. So by receiving funds from Europe, for example, the spending requirement then it kind of pushes the budget up as well. So it's always about finding that balance between what we want and what we need in order to shape the film that we eventually want to make.
Yeah. I mean, for Apprentice, for example, you said it took 4 years to make. And I'm just curious, like, when in the process did you start approaching financiers and partners? Was it like 2 years into the process when you had kind of fleshed out the idea more and the film more, or was it even earlier on?
For Apprentice, it took actually a total of 6 years to finish. It started when, it started with an idea, obviously, and then we started pitching it. We went to the cinema in Rotterdam, which is one of the most important project markets in the world. We pitched the project there over and over again, every half an hour for 4 days. It's kind of like a speed dating for projects. And then from there, we found producers who came and said, we really like your project. We really like the idea. Here's the kind of money we can apply for from where we are from. But then that was really just the starting point, because by that time we only had like a draft of the script that we weren't happy with. People liked the idea, but they still wanted to read the script. And it took us another 2 years to finish the script. And in the meantime, we were invited to a script lab in Jerusalem, where I went 3 times to write and to have the script ripped apart and put back together again. But it was a very, very important process in creating the film. And finally, so then at that point, when we were at the script lab for the whole year, the financing plan was also being put together in tandem. And then so by the third year of the writing, that was when we realized, okay, we need to actually shoot in a prison that looked good. And we couldn't find it in Asia, so we went to Australia to find the prison. And of course, shooting in Australia made it even more expensive, and that pushed the budget further. So we had to look for more money. So yeah, only in late 2014 we went into production. We shot the film, but then it took another 2 years after that for it to premiere at Cannes because of the editing process and the coloring process,
Goodness.
sound design. So all in all, it took us from the idea, took us to the premiere. It took us 6 years. Yeah.
I mean, how are you able to stay focused, like keep the vision together and the project moving forward, on something that's taking 6 years and going through so many different iterations and so many stages of development while doing, as you say, like paying the bills and doing those projects? Is there a way you're able to structure your work days or work weeks or work year, or is it just it happens and you got to go make it happen? Because I can barely do two things at once, so I'm curious how you're able to do that. Because I think the creative energy is so different than like a managing energy. It's like a very different part of the brain that's used.
Well, first of all, I think I suppose one of the things that keep me going, one of the key things that keep me going would be because at the starting point, the reason why I choose to look at the death penalty in Singapore, or in the case of Sandcastle, the story of political exiles, is precisely because the issues are something that I care about, and that kind of is always kind of in the back burner and kind of propelling me even if things aren't going well.
Yeah.
To think that, okay, this is an important story. It matters to me. It matters to some people I know, and I have to put this out there, right? So sometimes the issue is that starting point. It's what sets me off. But then, as you write and as you work, the characters that you're writing grows with you, kind of lives with you. And then your collaborators, your producers, or your co-writers who come on board care as much, and then you kind of form a little circle of a support group, and you push the project forward together. But then, of course, along the way, as more and more people join, the thing just kind of grows organically in the direction that it needs to grow. But then at the times when I need to take time off to do my other projects, to make a living, it's not such a bad thing to take a break from it once in a while, because it refreshes it for you. It kind of so over time you kind of just go through this cycle of needing to go into, say, NDP for a few months, right? Or in the case of NDP. One of the National Day parades I did as multimedia director, I was doing it. It was 2015, and I was actually editing the film. I was editing Apprentice, and we basically couldn't meet the deadline before I had to start work on NDP. So we decided that, okay, you know what? Let's just take like half a year off and come back to it again. And then that's what we did, and that's why it extended the post-production by almost a year for the film. But by doing that and coming back to it several months later, it actually gave me a very, very fresh perspective on what the film was, and it developed us in the editing process of the film as well. So I think being able to come on and off is actually, in many ways, a blessing in disguise. Yeah.
And I guess it's one of the advantages working in that film space that you're in, right? Because I imagine if it was more of a quote-unquote commercial film, then you wouldn't be able to extend the production like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, of course, I also had producers. In fact, it was a producer that I worked very closely with who offered that to me to say, you know what, I think we should take a break. And indeed, that was the right decision. It takes a team that cares for the film as first and foremost a work of art.
Yes.
to be able to understand why a process like that was necessary.
I'm just curious about like what your common day is like. Like today is a Tuesday, because you seem to be working in a very project-based fashion, right? Whether it's on your films, on commercials for the National Day Parade, art installations, whatever it is. So are there days where sometimes you're just looking for inspiration or not doing anything? Like I'm just curious what an average week for you looks like.
Well, it's very hard to say what. It depends on when you're asking me this question. Now, because I am writing my next film, the best days are the ones where I don't need to do anything else, and I wake up, I walk my dog, and then I come back into my study, and I turn on some music, make a coffee, and then I start writing. So, and then I'm not interrupted by anything else until the end of the day. But those days are very hard to come by because there will be, people who, because I also have a couple of like ongoing commission work that I'm overseeing. So, I will then tell those producers, the producers on those projects that, okay, disturb me only in the afternoons.
Yes.
I will not give you a reply in the mornings. So then I kind of break my day up so that I make sure that I at least have half a day to work on it uninterrupted. So those will be the good days. The bad days would be the ones that I'm constantly interrupted by emergencies or the ones where I have set aside, but the ideas just don't come, and I feel like I'm wasting the day, and I'm just like, not being productive. I learn over time that it's also a part of the process. I just have to sit it out, be patient with it. It's natural to be frustrated sometimes, but you just have to. You learn that at the end of it, something's gonna come, or something's going to spark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find like those ideas come to you when you're forcing yourself to sit down, putting your butt in that chair and writing or imagining your next film? Or do they come to you when you're walking your dog? Because you've made so many films at this stage, I'm wondering kind of, is each one different when it strikes you? Or is there a way you can kind of structure your creative time so that they open up?
Again, it depends which stage you're talking about. Like for my feature films, when it was a blank canvas, it was the hardest because it's hard. When it's a blank canvas, you need to kind of commit to a starting point, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you sketch something, it doesn't work, and then sometimes you work on a detail and try and expand on that, and it doesn't work. So it's usually in that space whereby the freer it is, the harder it is to commit to something. But as things develop, as you commit to something, you commit to characters, they are who they are to you, at least. Then it is when you have those building blocks, then it kind of, the momentum starts to come. And you start to piece it together, but you need to have had those pieces to begin with in the first place. So it depends on which part of the process this is.
Yeah.
But it also depends on what kind of project it is. When it is my own films, it would be, as I've said. But when it is, say, a commission work, whereby there's a point to it, right? Or if it's commercial, whereby there is a message you need to deliver, then there is already an ending point. So in some ways, for those projects, it is less art, more design, I suppose. You're kind of looking to deliver something, and therefore you are designing something to be able to meet those marks. So yeah, then that brings a different set of creative process.
Yeah, and did you write the script for both Apprentice and Sandcastle, for both your feature films?
Yeah, I did.
Wow. You didn't used to do that, right? This is something you developed over time, right? Writing scripts for these films, or?
Well, I developed over time when I was making my independent short films. And then with Sandcastle, I wrote it on my own. With Apprentice, I developed the story with my producer. My producer and I worked very closely on developing the story as well. So yeah, I think, but writing was something that I didn't do as much when I was in film school. I only did that when I was, when I had to make my films. So the stories had to come from somewhere,
Well, that's what I'm actually really curious about, like how you mastered the craft of script writing, right, as well. Because there's so many parts to a film, right? Obviously, the script writing, the cinematography, the direction. How do you think about getting better at what you do in those specialized areas?
I was really writing in the beginning out of necessity, really, because I just wanted. I had stories in mind I wanted to tell. I had stories that I felt were cinematic, and up until that point, I even though I had friends who are amazing writers, who've written novels or plays or poems, but I just still didn't feel like they fully understood what a cinematic screenplay was about, or rather what it took to kind of put on paper what a film should sound like or should look like. So that I took it upon to do that. It was also more common by that time from my spheres of influence in world cinema for writers and directors to have existed. So a lot of the filmmakers that I looked up to were writer-directors. So it didn't feel unnatural that I was writing my own scripts. And so then it just became a natural thing, it was just how I put on paper what I saw as a film. In the beginning, the transition from shorts to feature films was challenging because for shorts, you only needed to write 10, 15 pages and sometimes it can just start from a detail, a scene, for example. You can jump right into it, and if it doesn't work, rewriting 10 pages is not difficult. But then in diving into my first feature film, and then later on with Apprentice, second feature film, it made me realize actually how different it was writing for a feature film.
Yeah.
And it was with the feature films that I learned to write, that I actually understood why writing synopsis and treatments and log lines were important. For shorts, you're just like so impatient, right? You just wanted to jump right into the script already. So what's the point of writing a treatment? But with feature films, I've learned the hard way in many ways to do a sketch first, to sketch it out first. And if it doesn't work, you're really just ripping up a 3-page synopsis.
Right.
And you don't have to have invested so much detail yet. And that was something that I learned when I was writing, but it didn't come naturally to me. When I was younger and when I was doing my drawings, when I had time, or in art class, I'm the person who would draw details first, and then things will look very out of proportion after that, because I was always I wanted to go into the details first. And it was a very similar approach when I was doing my shorts. But with the features, I learned to make the sketch first before I filled it up with details. Yeah.
Did you read like 100 movie scripts or, 10 scripts of your favorite directors? Or was it like a hashing out with all your collaborators? Because It seems like it would require a lot of practice, but what do I know?
Well, it did take a lot of practice, but I don't. It wasn't really about reading scripts. In fact, I actually don't really enjoy reading scripts. I I it was really just for me. The script is really just an articulation of what I saw as a movie.
Interesting.
So it was just putting it on paper, and it was a tool for me to be able to convince collaborators of what I saw. It was a tool for me to work with actors. But at the end of the day, it's just a manifestation in words of a film that I'm seeing in my head.
Right? That's so interesting.
So that's to me generally what a script has always been about. Right now, because I'm working more closely with my producer, and actually my next film I'm co-writing with him, then it is a lot of back and forth about what was this film I was seeing in my head, and what were the characters that had grown in him, in his mind, and kind of going back and forth, discussing. And so right now it's just constant discussions. But again, it's an externalizing of what used to be just in my head,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fascinating. I've never thought about it that way, but like moving on and thinking, now that you have 2 feature-length films under your belt, you've worked on some really big projects, you've been in the spotlight. Do you feel any pressure with expectations for your next film or your next projects?
Yeah, I think naturally there is pressure, but I try and use that as kind of for positive outcomes. I try and use that as fuel for pushing myself as well as my collaborators to keep at it, to keep doing what we do. And at the same time, I actually try to do different things. That's part of the reason, I dabble in installation work and stuff like that, trying to go to museums with my work, or trying to get into galleries, because as I challenge myself with different forms, I feel that it actually liberates me from certain expectations. It also liberates me from the usual parameters that I am bound to for the cinema screen, and that inspires me in other ways. So yeah, and in my next film, I try and use devices or forms that I hadn't used before, just to experiment and push myself. And I think that keeps it interesting for me. The challenges creatively keep it in me, so that it's never sort of a run-of-the-mill project.
Yes. No, I love that. That's very inspiring to hear. Taking a step back and thinking about, getting the word out about your films, growing the scene and so forth. I'm just curious how you think about social media and promotion, because you've always struck me as a very thoughtful person and who doesn't really like to be, screaming anything. As social media has developed during your time as a filmmaker, how have you embraced it or not embraced it?
I am on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and I hardly use my Twitter anymore, but just because I don't have time. For me, I try and use social media for the most innocent of reasons.
Is that what? To keep in touch with people, or what's the innocent of reasons?
Yeah. Mostly that, and putting up holiday pictures and stuff like that. Because I mean, to me, that human connection and just understanding what it is like to be networked that way, as any ordinary person would, is important, right? At the same time, I recognize that it's a huge promotional tool as well, and I will usually whatever it takes to get the film's attention,
right?
Because we are so crowded out by louder voices. bigger projects with bigger budgets and more resources. So we kind of need to just use whatever's within our means to push these projects out there. And so yeah, over time I have used social media both for my films and also for the social causes that I care for. But I try to, where possible, I try to compartmentalize them so that the pages will be for the films. But sometimes it's hard because I recognize that there are people who follow me or have added me. They care about just in general, I guess, about what I do. So then that is where things can kind of cross-pollinate and, you kind of cross-promote whatever matters to you the most at any point in time. So I would say for social media, I use it, even with what I do, in the most organic ways possible. I don't consume, any particular way. Yeah.
Yeah, because I personally find it very distracting, but I also see the immense power of being able to share something with thousands and thousands of people who are following you. But it's just something I'm working through myself, just how to deal with it all.
Well, I think that there are ways of making it beneficial, I'm sure. I was one of the founding members for Pink Dot back in 2009.
Can you tell us what is Pink Dot?
Okay, so I'm one of the founding members of Pink Dot SG, which is basically kind of Singapore's version of Pride, but without what we saw in the beginning as the baggage of Pride in the West. We wanted to kind of carve out our own narrative for what LGBTQ rights in Singapore, and using social media and using what was typically advertising and marketing angles to mobilize and to push the cause. And so a lot of it was about harnessing the powers of social media, the influence of it, of using PR, of using marketing and videos to make it happen. Like, I think now on Pink Dot Facebook we have about 50,000 followers, which is quite big for Singapore. And now it's reached like a steady place whereby the engagement that's being put out there, it does have an effect, and people look out for what Pink Dot has to say about things. But it's never an easy start. In the beginning, it was always in trying to navigate the landscape as it was changing. It was YouTube at first, then it was Facebook, and then when Facebook video started to have the autoplay function, then you learn that the videos needed to be done differently. And then Instagram came out. So little by little, we were trying to understand how to reach people.
Yeah.
But again, that was also very much out of necessity because the mainstream media in Singapore is very restrictive, especially on LGBTQ issues. So we needed social media to reach people because the mainstream media at that point in time wasn't helpful. Of course, as we grew and as our influence also grew, we became the voice in many ways for LGBTQ rights in Singapore. And as the discourse also progressed, the mainstream media couldn't ignore us or pretend we didn't exist anymore. So now we are very much in the mainstream in terms of the media we are able to engage with. But still, social media is a key platform for us to put our messages out there.
Related to what you're saying, you seem to... The issues you make films about and your work with Pink Dot, for example, these are all things that could be considered controversial in Singapore. Executions, political exiles, as you mentioned, homosexuality, these things. I just can't imagine what that's like to push the envelope on these issues in a country that, does have censorship, but is also supporting your craft. Like, that's such a interesting line to toe for me. Do you find that challenging?
Yeah, I see it as a dance.
A dance, yes.
I mean, it is kind of a back and forth. I mean, with confidence over the years, I have made it quite clear to, say, for example, the people who work at NDP, which is basically the military in Singapore. I made it clear to my collaborators there what I stand for and what I care about. But of course, not as at the first instance when you meet, but over time. And I think the mutual respect has grown from there. And I don't hide my sexuality. I am myself with them. And I think they see the merits, perhaps, of engaging with the likes of me. In that, I think the dialogue and the level-headedness, I suppose, of the conversations that should take place, they see the merits of that. That's not to say I haven't experienced pushback myself from the government, but it is in that constant engagement, sometimes conflict, sometimes dialogue, sometimes being friendly, sometimes not so friendly, where things progress, and that is how at least I have been doing it. I know there have been many other activists who do things differently, and they have all my respect. But for me, I just happen to have been able to find that balance so far. Who's to say what might tip the balance in the future? We'll never know.
Yeah. Just thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And looking towards the future, what's exciting you these days? I mean, from this conversation, I gather that you really just want to keep pushing the boundaries, right, of your capabilities, of your art, and you like to work on different stuff, keep things fresh. So yeah, I'm just curious, like what's exciting you these days? What are things you're looking forward to?
Well, right now, ironically, it's about trying to keep writing my current script, because it takes a lot of discipline. And even though we do have a good momentum going, we just need to keep that momentum and keep that routine going. So that is, at least on a day-to-day basis, what I care about the most. I get very excited when I'm able to finish several scenes a day, for example. So that excites me. But I think on a longer term basis, what excites me actually is the films of my peers, not just in Singapore but elsewhere in the world and in the region. Because I'm currently on the board of the Singapore International Film Festival as well. When I see a voice or something that makes me marvel at someone else's work, or allows me to discover something else from a region or from a filmmaker, I get very excited. And so that is also something else that it enriches me personally, but I believe with a growing audience for different kinds of films, it's going to be beneficial as a whole to the entire community, and that's something I care about very much as well.
Yeah. Interestingly, do you feel that space growing with all the streaming services and kind of technology that's available to upload films to? Or do you feel you're getting crowded out more by these mega blockbusters?
By streaming services, I assume you mean like Netflix and Amazon? Or...
Yes. I mean, those big streaming services. But I guess you could also put YouTube there as well. I would consider that a streaming service.
Well, YouTube is different. I think putting up a YouTube video, for example, is a very different craft from making a movie.
Oh yeah, no doubt. That, yeah.
So the kind of engagement that you have, the kind of feedback that you get, the kind of audience attention span that you're working with is vastly different. But I think in the space of the streaming giants like Netflix or Amazon or Apple TV Plus, etc., I think it does provide filmmakers like me different opportunities and different possibilities also in putting our work out there. But I also think that it's very hard to say what's going to be the future, because these things are constantly changing. I mean, Netflix used to be the underdog, and then they became the superpower. But then now with Disney coming in and Apple coming in, they are starting to, I think, feel the heat as well. So I think at least in the filmmaking business in recent years, things have been changing, and they will continue to change. But what I do know for now is that even some of the best films of the year have been put on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope this trend continues, because with the cinemas being crowded out with superhero films, it's always good to have alternative spaces to be able to show these films.
Absolutely. Like, I plan to watch Sandcastle this weekend, but it was so easy to watch Apprentice 2 days ago just through iTunes. I rented it. It looked great on my TV, and I know maybe you want a different viewing experience, maybe in a theater or so forth. But I mean, at least just to get it quickly, it was pretty flawless, I have to say, or frictionless. Yeah, I have one more question for you, Junfeng, and that's just, what advice would you give to someone whose primary goal is to create great art that may or may not be commercially rewarding? It seems like you've managed to walk that line very well, but I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I personally want to know.
Well, I'm not sure it's advice necessarily, because I think everyone walks a different path. And if an artist feels that something that's more commercial, but is still true to what they do, is their path to go, and, by all means, I think it's wonderful if someone is able to achieve that. For me, I just feel that at the moment there is a separation between what is deemed commercial and what I want to do, what I truly want to do.
Right.
And therefore, I find a different path to achieve that. I think when it comes to films being accessible, I think, what I did for National Day Parade, is possibly as accessible as it gets. But that, to me, is not the cinema that I want to create. Right? So therefore, I make a deliberate attempt to separate them, to be able to say, these films that I've made on the side, or rather these films that I've made and spent years on, are my films. Whereas those other work that I do on the side and commissioned to do, I'm still proud of them, but I wouldn't consider them my true work.
Interesting.
And,
yeah.
And so the distinction of that is what I've had to make to keep this going. But if someone is able to bridge that, of course, in time to come, I hope to be able to bridge that on my own terms. But in the meantime, if another filmmaker is able to bridge that and gain commercial success with that, I'd be very happy for him or her. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a lovely place to end this conversation. Junfeng, thank you so much for letting me interrupt one of your writing days to do.
It's okay. That's why it's in the afternoon.
Exactly. No, I really appreciate it. And I can really understand that need to, just put your head down and have silence and be creative and be uninterrupted. So I just want to thank you for sharing your time and your insights with our audience. I can't wait to publish this one, and wishing you the best of luck with your next feature film. And I can't wait to see it.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, I'm happy to reconnect and talk about all this.
Did you like that episode? Press subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends about us. Yeah, if you want to join the conversation, you want to talk more about this episode, go head over to upstartist.tv/ASE. That's ASE.